What's up, too? It's been a while since I've been on the video spectrum. I haven't recently uploaded or distributed any informative videos purposely because I had personal matters, endeavors, and goals that I needed to get taken care of. But I'm here now, and I want to give you guys an elaborative, well-organized synopsis on the international debt crisis. First off, people are going to say, "Whoa, international debt crisis, aren't we experiencing that as of now?" Well, of course we are, but most people in general are incognizant and oblivious to the calamity that was well orchestrated meticulously down to a T. And see, they purposely disinform and misinform us with the propagandization so that way we don't correlate and make it a positive to the the social, political, and economical issues that we're having as of now. First things first, they tell you or they misconstrue the people, especially here in America. And I always stress that in America because that's where most of the propaganda lies. But anyway, they misconstrue to the people here that the people of the so-called third world nations are very vile, violent, um, ignominious, and just despicable beings that really don't belong on the earth, pretty much. They like to classify them and dismiss them as being inferior. And being primitive, most importantly, because they don't think people here in America think that most people in the third world nations don't have the capabilities nor the cognition to really build infrastructures and modernize their economies. That's not true. Though a lot of them do sell out and compromise with the imperialistic values of Western civilizations, they're not primitive whatsoever. Um, in reality, there are people that's trying to make it like most of the people here, but their economies were totally decimated by foreign entities, and then where they had to trade their national resources, and now they become slaves. So first, like I said, the first things first is that's not true. Let's dismiss that sort of acrimony and predilection people have towards those people of the less developed nations. Second of all, there was an international debt crisis that transpired in the mid '70s to I would say no late '70s to early '80s, and it's because numerous countries in that of Africa, Latin America, even Mexico, they defaulted in their international debt repayments or debt loans that they had received from foreign entities. A lot of them are U.S. backed owned banks itself. So they defaulted on those. And what really happens is first off, let me get this thing off. They have economical hitman or economic hitman. That's what they like to call them. And most people really are unaware of the economic hitman. Well, basically, what happens with economic hitman is they make these gargantuan international loans to less developed nations, and they funnel that money back to U.S. engineering companies in exchange for construction projects, right, that are deliberately undermined, never completed, purposely. Now, these with the unfulfilled promises and uncompromising corporations, well, these third world nations or less developed nations, I like to call them, their economies become bankrupt. So consequently, they're coerced into not only giving up their their indigenous and natural resources, but also their UN vote to U.S. creditors, where they then perpetuate the calamity that takes place. So that's the number one thing you know how the economic hitman works. Second of all, to give you like the structural and organized view on how this really took shape is first things first. Countries such as Brazil, Mexico. I'm really gonna focus on Latin America because that's a lot. That's where a lot of the dire straits took place. But you also had countries in that of Africa as well. But to really focus on these two. So yeah, countries such as Brazil, Argentina, different countries in South America, yeah, Mexico. They borrow substantially in order to fund industrialization and to build infrastructures in order to keep up with the rest of the flourishing economies and that of the Western worlds. Um, they borrowed, I would say in my reading it said, up to 50% of these foreign countries' gross domestic product. Um, and see what happened was these dreadful complications began transpiring in the early 80s when gas prices began skyrocketing to an incommensurable amount. And most Latin more low, okay, well, most Latin American countries were vast net importers of oil. So they faced a higher import costs as well as the world economy slowed down drastically. You also had strict policies, which I'm gonna really get into, but just to give you a underlying overview of what happened. Strict policies also they led to the depreciation and devalorization of the country's currencies, consequently making it more difficult for them to compensate the debt collectors. Um, Third world nations, less developed nations, like they call them, their economies began plummeting to a downward spiral, and it made it more difficult for them to recompense the debt collectors as well. The debt collectors being U.S. creditors and foreign banks owned by Westerners. Um, you also had in the early 80s interest rates increased substantially, and see the amalgamation of these circumstances meant that the third world, less developed nations' national income was totally inadequate and insufficient enough to equate to the amount of interest they needed to owe. So they couldn't really equate the amount of money that they were bringing in to enough to offset the abuse, I like to call it, of money from the foreign entities or foreign corporations. So what happened was this led to the destabilization and de-establishment or collapse rather of authoritarian regimes such as Argentina, countries in Latin America, Mexico. So that's what began that great influx of people from Latin America predominantly and even Africa to come to America to seek the so-called American dream. Now, what was the response to this? Well, the response was the International Monetary Fund, or you had other world banks and organizations that lend money out. So they lend money out to say, okay, we'll help build your economies and get them back up to par with the rest of the world, but under certain conditions. And there are like many conditions that they impose, but I'm really going to delve into a couple. They had privatization of natural resources, where that would become subsequent to a unaffordable luxury. You also had dismantling of tariffs, surcharges, any kind of trade barriers. Now, for example, you had Bolivia. The Bolivia government had made a pact with Bechtel, which is a U.S. backed company, and once again, their economy was totally demoralized and desolated that they made a pact with them. Now, Bechtel privatized their water, which then prone them to uh, exploitation, in which they were exploited. But then they rebelled against that regime because they wanted the water back, and many people were dying. But anyway, this concept of really decimating economies and getting them on the same currency or the same level of currency of the Westerners is known as globalization. Simple terms, all it is globally moving something place to place, open up the economy. A more sinister term would be it's a process of manipulation by the corporatocracy by the use of bribery, political overthrow, and corruption. See, just as the Federal Reserve keeps its stranglehold on America's economy through perpetual debt, inflation, and interest, the IMF in particular and other World Bank organizations serve this purpose, but on a global scale. See, the structure is as follows. They impose these conditionalities or structural adjustment policies where, well, first off, they put a country in debt through either by their own indiscretion or by corrupting the leader of that particular country. Then they impose conditionalities, known as, or i.e., structural adjustment policies. And these usually compose of the following. You have privatization of natural resources, which I kind of elaborated on earlier. Whereas, for example, the autochthonous people's natural resources are, well, no, not that's another subject, but you privatize social and prominent social systems or enterprises in which you regulate them for profit, solely for profit, but you rape in the benefits. You slowly decimating the domestic enterprises over there. You also have, and we're talking about the structural adjustment policies here. You also have the devalorization and as well as the depreciation of currencies, which, for example, which pretty much it leads to the devaluement of not only currencies but also natural resources. For example, you have like the autochthonous people, natural resources are made, are prone to vulnerability and exploitation by foreign entities or corporations of a to a fraction of its initial worth. So you devalue their currency, you devalue everything in it as well. So now you could buy, let's say for example, a mango that was initially let's just say $5, hypothetically speaking, and now it's $2 because it's devalued. So now they can reap in those benefits and then distribute it elsewhere. You also have voluminous cuts in social and funding programs, where you say voluminous funding cuts in social and educational programs, perceivably, like I said, education and healthcare, where you consequently you compromise the well-being and integrity of that society and making them prone to um, exploitation. So this is known as globalization. And you also have the big one I like to really elaborate on. This is trade liberalization. Trade liberalization is just the process of reducing trade that thwart the free flow of goods and services to one nation to another. This includes dismantling of tariffs, surcharges, and export subsidies, as well as non-tariff barriers such as license regulations, arbitrary standards, and there was one more: license regulations, arbitrary standards, and other kind of like terminology they throw at you just to get you to open up your economy. But what this is known as when they get rid of that is the elimination of protectionism. Protectionism is just you impose your taxes, your taxation on imports. So trade barriers they kind of protect and encourage they encourage and protect domestic industries. They they tend to give impetus to political high political decisions in economical matters. So it's good to have those in terms of a domestic industry. But when you have selfish and insidious corporations that want to regulate your economies, then you're proning yourself to exploitation and really just getting totally destroyed and demolished. So, to really elaborate on free trade, there's pros and cons in everything. The pros would be of free trade. It will most they would say comparative advantage. Comparative advantage is just ultimately, well, it's theoretically speaking, it's supposed to help a country flourish by them ultimately specializing in the activity in regards to the advantage that they may have, and that might be skilled workers, friendly weather. It might be phenomenal agriculturalists. So they might have the comparative advantage in those categories or anything else. So that's one theory that you can say, yes, it does help the economy. But they don't talk about is who reaps in the benefits? Well, it's the ones that made the pact, not the ones who are working for the people that created the pact. So that's one advantage you can say. Another one is introduction of capital and technology, thereby having that less developed nation flourish. You have the elimination of protectionism, which protectionism, all it is shielding a country's domestic industries from foreign uh, corporations. So you eliminate protectionism, consequently eliminate tariff surcharges, any kind of taxation that comes with it. Now imports are equal. They're on an equal playing field with the domestic merchandise. So now this reaps in, they can say, it helps the economy flourish, but it really just helps out the foreign corporations. Another thing would be functionalism. Functionalism is just that you have this pact that they made, and this demands cooperation with the two pacts, with the two parties involved. And then now you pave the way for them to function properly, as well as other countries that want to get into it. So this is known as just functionalism itself, in simple man terms. Um, you also have the promotion of growth. Point blank, you open up an economy. The theory is you promote growth in that economy. Um, that's about all the pros I can really think of that really have significance. Um, so you can see the good right there. Now the cons would be, well, the biggest con would be infant industries are vulnerable to foreign corporations. So now they can be regulated because of the elimination of protectionism by foreign corporations, where now they have control of it. So infant industries can't really thrive or flourish because they can't keep up with the distributing of goods from that foreign corporation. They can't really get on their feet, so they're either consequently bought out or just um, they begin to diminish into just a distant memory. They're no more. You have the comparative advantage where it would be comparative disadvantage because you're dependent on too many goods. I mean, on so little goods. So the advantage of comparative advantage is, I'm going to correlate it to this, is you can distribute corn around the world. And let's say, just put that for example. You distribute corn. That's what you specialize in. You have the plant, you have the field just laid out to distribute corn across the world. You have the remarkable weather to complement it. So what happens from there? Well, let's just say demand for corn begins plummeting to a precipitous amount. Now, you were just dependent on corn. You had the comparative advantage. Now, demand of corn has begun, it's sort of becoming very subtle and tenuous. So now your establishment becomes a thing of the past. Now it's, you can say, it's going to be regulated by a foreign corporation, or it's going to be just destroyed right off the map, just like that. You have cultural imperialism, where now you open up the economy. Now, a foreign corporation or country can come in and bring in you can say, imperialistic ideologies. You don't want that. For instance, you can have a country, let's say, for instance, in Mexico. They probably don't want America or other imperialistic ideologies in their country, but you made a pact so they could bring it in, so they could bring Hollywood in. They could bring Dance with the Stars into your territory because you opened up, you made a pact. As I said, the infant industries, let's just say, harmonization. Well, I wouldn't say that. Well, yeah, harmonization. It reaches a downward fall because you have to harmonize with your people, because now you let that transnational corporation bring in their products. They might have it cheaper. Now you have to you have to detract the amount from your environmental and labor as well as other standards to really compete on the equal playing field with the foreign corporations. So that's known as harmonization downward. Another one is, well, another pro I just thought of was the promotion of so-called democracy because it promotes transparency as well as um, and uh, discipline within that economy. That's a pro of the promotion of democracy, supposedly. So, like I said, that econ was um, you have to be able to harmonize with your people as well as because you have to detract from your standardized price. Another one would be that's about it. Actually, that's about it. So those are just the pros and cons of those. It might seem a little bit discombobulated and totally just in perplexed, but that's what really the underlying basis is. So I laid down what's trade liberalization and the pros and cons of free trade. People don't know that America itself they had the first free trade agreement back in 1984, December or September 1st with Israel, who's like I like to say their father. America's the arm of Israel itself. But anyway, they had their pact with Israel will allow them to distribute American goods into Israel's domestic enterprises and be on an equal playing field with European goods. They also had their 1988 um, compromise with Canada, which was superseded 1994 by the North Atlantic Free Trade Agreement, known as NAFTA. Very controversial, but it happened. It is what it is. America has many pacts and compromises in regards to free trade with 20 different countries, and it's still pending because the Trans-Pacific partnership between the so-called Asians and other countries, America wants to um, intervene with that and propose what they want out of that. So you might have more countries bringing in their goods and merchandise into America as well. Most people don't. The average people don't like free trade, known as neoliberalism. They don't like that as much because it promotes privatization, and then what happens is a lot of jobs that get outsourced overseas because they can employ more people. Because once again, you link that to what happened in the international debt crisis. They're coming to America. Then you also have the ones that remain back. They don't have anything. You can easily put a McDonald's over there, have them work for 50 cents a day to make a living. That's not even how you can't even make a living out of that. But they employ them for that because they're used to not having nothing, and that's why they come to America. And it's that constant influx of people coming here in and out. Like, why are you here? Why are they able to set up shop? Because there's pacts with these different countries. So that's pretty much how globalization really works down to a T, and how capitalism works down to a T. As we know, America is really not. It's nothing more than a de facto government, which is just it wasn't legitimately established. It's operating out of um, the real natural laws that they were reputedly supposed to stand by, but they're acting out of corporate laws de facto. And America is not really a democracy because they have elements of feudalism, statism, um, and even uh, capitalism. So you can't really give a very indiscreet term to describe what kind of country America is. It's nothing more than a corporation itself operating on corporate laws on our corporate selves. So that's just the basis of how this country is ran. Like I strongly suggest you read into the international debt crisis that took place in the 70s and 80s. And that's what happened with Castro because his implementation of communism, and they seen that as a threat. So really, just dive into that, read into it. Now you know the pros and cons. Just speaking subjectively, how I feel. So read into it, research it. I'm out of here. I'll make another video. It's probably on this is a nice one, the IQ test, and how that was based on a Eurocentric and very preconceived notions to dismiss people and to perpetuate that standard that these people are more superior to these people. So I'll get on that, make that one really soon. You guys stay up. Peace.